fractional share market. You got companies like Collectible, Rally. I got a feeling those are not going to be the only two. I think it's going to, like everything else, there's going to be more people jumping in that fray. I'll be honest with you. Full disclosure, I've got about $100 as far as fractional shares in each of those two companies I just mentioned. I did it not so much to be an advocate, or I did it so I could participate on my show itself, kind of talk about the experience and what I see from being in the inside, so to speak, as a consumer rather than as someone who's not involved. Brian Gray wasn't really opposed to it. I don't want to speak for him. You can check that episode out on YouTube. But he had some concerns about the liquidity of your money if you wanted to get out of your fractional share, who's in charge of selling said card and the card aspect of it. He had a lot of questions. I'm pretty sure he said it won't be something he would partake in. I want to start with Dr. Jim first. You've seen a lot of things in this hobby. This is fairly new. It's not completely new. It's been in other forms, but now in the modern tech age where there's apps now where you can just open up your phone and do it in that form or fashion. And in 5 minutes, that's all it took me on each of those platforms to put $100 into a couple cards. There's kind of what your thoughts on it, like it, don't like it, thoughts, concerns.
It's not about liking it or not liking it. It's a free world. And I won't say it was inevitable, but it's probably certainly an idea worth trying. And you're not going to know how successful it is in the first year necessarily, but they seem to be doing well. A couple points. One is that these are businesses that are coming in and they are regulated for the most part. And so Brian's concerns, if you got to go to the fine print, but when you go to the fine print, you'll see there's a 90-day lockup period. There's selling windows, but all that stuff, again, they'll get in trouble if they don't abide by the rules that are either imposed on them or that they've chosen for these business entities. But okay, so that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that the businesses that I think Brian is getting at is that there's no assurance that these businesses will flourish. Maybe they need to. It's not a pyramid scheme, but they're going to keep adding in new products and taking in new money. And you shouldn't get into these things unless, again, the valuations of some of these things are so high that you need to ask yourself, which is impossible to be honest with yourself, would I want to buy that card at that price? Because if I don't want to buy the card at that price, why would I want to buy 1% of that card at that price? The answer is, and it's not like buying 1% of Apple or Microsoft, because they have dividends, they have earnings, they have perhaps some increase in value. These cards, these glamour cards, to say I own 1 share of it or 10 shares or 1%, I guess that's some level of bragging rights, regardless of whether that underlying asset goes up or not.
Yeah, it's fun. So, I bought into the Mantle, just, 5 shares.
Well, and it's something to talk about.
And I jokingly posted on my Twitter, like, I'm the minority owner of this 50.
Well, no, it's not even jokingly. That's interesting to me. And that's another way for people to enjoy the hobby. But can you imagine that you had, if you take it to absurdity, I could own a tiny piece of every card in the industry. I have every card, but I only have 1/1,000,000th of 1% of every card. And but then maybe that gives me the rights to show the image in some special way on my social media. Who knows? But some of these cards, when they get into the millions, or they're one of ones, so it's a new day. We're in the age of social sharing being almost a form of currency. Again, it's an idea who's come, and we'll see what kind of legs it has.
Yeah, Jeff, is this something you're interested? What are your something you're considering?
I'm torn in between. I guess a big question for me would be, through this whole fractional share market, would be, so we're buying in to have a piece or own a piece of a card or cards, whatever you get into. Who is it? The companies that are basically running this then that decide at some point if a card is going to sell? Does a card ever sell?
Yeah,
where do we go when we put our money in and we sit and watch it like a stock, maybe like a retirement type deal? But where do we go, or how do we know? How is it going to be controlled? Is this company's controlling it? How are they going to decide at some point down the road, hey, are we selling this now? I guess that would be some of the questions I would have before I would just
but that's
put money in any fractional.
It's all spelled out. Every question you had has to be addressed before they even get their SEC permission, because they're very legitimate questions. And questions that everybody, I think people, though, to John's point, some people are not reading the fine print, and then they're buying something, and then they're asking the questions you're asking. The questions you're asking are outstanding, but I believe they're all addressed. And the other tricky thing is, because there are other entrants in this space, each one can do it a little bit differently.
Yeah. I believe I should know this since I got $100 in each platform, but I believe the one plans on eventually selling the card like on an auction platform, and then I think the other is planning to just reopen the shares. So if you bought the shares at $20 a piece, after that 90-day hold that Dr. Jim mentions, they may open it back up. All right, who didn't get in on the initial offering? If any of the existing shareholders wants to sell, here's the level, and then you can get out. Someone new can buy your shares and get in. If the perception is like it's worth it to do that now, like it's worth it. John paid $20 a share. I'm going to pay 28 and buy his. He's going to get out and make $8, minus commissions, and then I'm going to own it. But it's, like Dr. Jim says, it's a great point. You have to weigh out: is it worth the $28 now?
Coming at this as an entrepreneur, most people that are hobbyists are going to be thinking about potentially buying into this fractional ownership. But I think like the entrepreneur. So I think if I set up a company like this, how would I make money? So if I'm the fractional ownership, leadership, ownership, whatever, the people that own the company, I can make money first by acquiring an asset into it and valuing it greater than what I paid. So I can make money right from the start by saying, I'm going to buy this card for $9,000 and put it up for $10,000. So I've already made something. Okay. Then I also can make money if later on the card goes up in value. And then I also can make money when anytime there's a transaction, I get a little percentage when there's trading. And so as a business model, this has been tried in other fields. And I think if there's enough activity and a dynamic element to it, which there is in sports cards, that things go up, but they go down. Let's see how they handle it if something goes down. Can I short their portfolio? I don't think I want to, but when you get to absurd, when you when you get in trouble sometimes, when you take a wonderful hobby and try to institutionalize it into a business. I'm sure I've been asked whether I own a Wagner.
I've asked you that
more than 1,000 times by 1,000 people. And just to close this off on the fractional ownership, could I respectfully say yes if I owned $100 worth of a Wagner that was in poor condition and valued at $1 million? I think I just keep my mouth shut and say, no, I don't own one, because the next question is, can I see it? Again, we live in a digital world. In the 20th century, this fractional concept would have been, and again, the logistics are difficult, but if you had 12 guys go together and say, we're going to buy a Wagner card, we're each going to put in 1/12, and we're each going to get to have it for 1 month. Then you'd have physically have it. That's the meeting of the two worlds. What Jeff is bringing up is that if you can't touch it, you can't feel it, and somebody has it somewhere out there. But for some people, that's enough because they can show the picture and say, I own a piece of this card. It's prohibitively expensive for me, but I can say that I own part of it. It's just how much mileage did Barry Halper get out of being a part owner of the Yankees? He was not a majority owner. George Steinbrenner called the shots, but he got to go to the ownership meetings, and he owned 5% tops. Now, that's still 5% of a $1 billion asset, probably. But I'm just saying, there's a pride of ownership that can still extend to fractional.
Jim, if you've never talked about it in the podcast, I think you did mining trips in the 70s. You probably had similar type stories.
12 guys. I talked about the one, I think I did that maybe in the George Lyons tribute episode, but there are 12 guys. We took on the Greater Boston before there was a Greater Boston show, and we had a couple 100,000 cards. I don't know what it was. And I was the guy that divided it up among 12. Now, it wasn't rotationally, but it was just, here are the 12 pieces. But we all pooled our money and we bought these various collections all across, and that was fun. And but that's not fractional ownership. That's a buying syndicate where each guy walks away with something. In the fractional, the way it's envisioned now, you don't walk away with anything except maybe a piece of paper. In this day and age, social influencers are very powerful. But this fractional ownership concept is having a huge social influence, not just through the social media, but through mainstream media. A lot of the headlines, maybe half the headlines of the last 3 months of these record prices that have gotten a lot of attention and the purchasers of some of these expensive cards are the fractional ownership people. And so that's driving a lot of this enthusiasm and price increases in our category, because a couple of cards were bought by somebody that's going to put them. So the higher the price went, the more publicity value they had, the bigger the headline was that it was $1 million, then it was $1.8 million, and it was 3.6.